All right, man. Today is Tuesday, January 19th. Welcome to the Dog Walk presented by Barstool Sports. You hear how clear I just sounded?
Sounded good.
I took my time. I enunciated.
Pronounced everything.
Yes.
Hit every syllable.
I know. I don't usually like doing that. I just like to zip through. Let's get to business.
Bang, bang. Let's go.
There we go. So, Chief, how we doing?
I feel good.
You do?
Yeah. I mean, my voice is a little raspy. I'm conscious about it now because your voice sounds crystal clear. You're like purring like a cat over there, and I'm a little scratchy.
I hear you. But not the best topic today. Actually, not a good topic at all, but it's interesting nonetheless. Important, interesting, and it fits, what's going on this week. Yeah,
we're going to talk about Martin Luther King Jr. and more specifically his assassination, the man who was charged with the crime, the perpetrator, who I didn't know anything about him, which I thought is interesting. Like, about Lee Harvey Oswald, about the guy,
John Wilkes Booth,
exactly, who killed Lincoln. Like, some of these names who killed prominent people. Brutus killed Julius Caesar. Like, you just know some of them, and it's just like they're just in the pop culture. And you would think that more people would know more about this guy that killed Martin Luther King Jr., but we just don't.
Yeah. So, I thought about that when you said it. Like, do you know his name? I was like, no, I don't. And like I said, you could rattle off Harvey Oswald and fucking
even Bobby Kennedy's killer, Sirhan Sirhan. Like that's another guy. It's just like everybody just kind of knows that name, and they were killed 2 months apart, and everybody knows Sirhan Sirhan. And I had to learn about
Sirhan is his name.
I believe, unless I'm getting that wrong.
I'm not questioning you. I guess I didn't know. And I didn't know a ton about Brutus either, but that's neither here nor there. Regardless, you know what we're trying to say here when we say that there's prominent people who have killed prominent people, I should say.
I just confirmed it is Sirhan Sirhan.
That's a one name, two name?
Well, it's Sirhan Bizhara Sirhan. So short, first name, last name, Sirhan Sirhan, as far as I can tell.
Gotcha. Well, before we get into it, we got to talk about Roman, Chief.
Okay.
Most people who've tried lasting
nice
longer
Julius Caesar
in bed.
Drop there. Roman.
You're right.
There we go.
Julius Caesar. He would use fucking Roman right now.
Fuck yeah, I would.
He'd be swiping the dick. Thinking about Caesar, thinking about, the ancient times, it's not going to work. It's not going to help you last longer.
Nope.
That's why the folks at Roman are here. They're an online men's health company, and they're changing the game with Roman Swipes. Roman Swipes are clinically proven way to last longer in bed. They're effective, easy to use, and fast-acting, but they don't require a prescription. Roman Swipes can ship swipes to you in discreet, unmarked packaging, and each swipe packet is small enough to hide in your wallet for whenever you need it. They're super easy to use. Just take the swipe out of the packet, swipe it on, let it dry, and you're good to go. That's it. All you got to do to get your hands on these is go to GetRoman.com/dogwalk. You can get your first month of swipes for just $5 when you choose a monthly plan. That's GetRoman.com/dogwalk. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about, we're talking FBI today, even they can't figure out what's in that discrete packaging. So if that's something you're worried about, don't worry about it. So it's a great product. We use it. I like it. Just swipe it on, you're good to go.
There we go. All right, Chief, so let's hop into it. Let's hop into Martin Luther King Jr. Assassination.
Yeah, I think, he's still obviously like a figure. And if anyone's been on social media in the last 48 hours, you've seen dozens, maybe hundreds, thousands of people doing Martin Luther King Jr. quotes, and it was because he was this great man. He was a civil rights leader probably from the mid-50s up until his death in 1968, and was really just known for doing it through nonviolence and peaceful protest. And he's a guy that we were obviously, he's borderline like deified when you study him in school. It's just like, this is just a great man. And and he's known for his ideals, and that obviously he has like one of the greatest speeches of the 20th century, that I Have a Dream speech, and that's what we know about him. But, and we'll get into some of this a little bit later, like anybody else, he's a person, and he's not like a deity or a god. He's got some flaws, and the FBI was and specifically J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head and the kind of the founder of the FBI, were very interested in some of his personal shortcomings and wanted to use that against him because they saw him as such a threat to the way things were. But I also just think, the history of him, and I asked you before we started, like, what is this guy's name who killed him? His name is James Earl Ray. And there are, again, it's like I know everything there is to know about Lee Harvey Oswald. There's all kinds of different conspiracies. The Martin Luther King Jr., who you could say maybe the most influential and prominent person from that era, killed in a similar fashion with a high-powered rifle from across the way. And maybe it's just because there's no video of it, like the Zapruder film, like kind of was like, holy shit, like there's a president being shot on camera. Maybe that's kind of why people are so fascinated with that one, and it was a president and not as much. But yeah, James Earl Ray is one of these most infamous assassins of all time, and kind of an unlikely guy with like an unsavory past. Almost, he makes you think that he's not even capable of doing something like this. But so he was a guy who's born into abject poverty outside of St. Louis, rural, in Missouri, just very poor. He joins the army and serves in West Germany after World War II as kind of like a policekeeping thing. He gets dishonorably discharged. So it's like, I couldn't find out what exactly he did to get that dishonorable discharge, but he's kicked out of the military dishonorably. And then when he comes back to the United States after that, he just becomes like a small-time criminal. So he has no real education, doesn't really know anything, can't really hold down a job. So he just starts like, he robbed a cab driver for $11. He would stick up a store. He would do this, he'd do that. And eventually he goes to jail. He gets caught for burglary and goes to jail. His sentence is 45 months, but he gets back out shortly after that, maybe I think 3 years into that sentence, and almost immediately with a friend that he met in jail, sticks up a Kroger Foods. So now it's like it's your second offense. It's a larger offense. It's an armed. He did it while armed. He gets sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. So he's living out his time in prison. In the 7th year of that 20-year sentence, guess what? He escapes.
Wow.
He just breaks out of jail. He sneaks into the back of like a bread truck and just gets out, and then he's just like on the lam. Like he's a fugitive and is not like he has different aliases and stuff, but he's just like out. And he's like kind of running around the country, running around the South, and that he escaped prison on April 23rd, 1967. And James Earl Ray claims that, he was doing all these different jobs to make money. And one of them was that he was a gun runner for this Cuban guy named Raul. And they were running guns all over the country, running them into Cuba. Like, it sounds like we've talked about this before, but I think it was Operation Northwoods, or Operation Mongoose rather, where they're trying to like have these Cubans invade, like exiled Cubans invade Cuba and kick Castro out and assassinate Castro, and they're like running guns onto these training missions. It was like a covert operation. So if he's running guns with a Cuban guy, like kind of weird. He also did a stint in Mexico. Like he went down to Mexico when he was a fugitive and was like, you know what I'm going to do with my life? I'm going to be a porn director. So he starts like shooting these amateur porns, and like he would get in tight with all these like Mexican prostitutes and film them. He started dating one. Then he got into trouble with one of them, and then he was like on the run from like people who wanted to stick up for her. So he goes back to the United States, and that's actually when he got hooked up with this guy, allegedly, who was doing the gun running. He also worked. You know the name George Wallace?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've seen Forrest Gump, and the guy standing and he was a governor of Alabama who was a segregationist, and extremely racist guy. He ran for president, and I want to say in 64 or maybe 68. 64. It must it must have been 68. And so this guy, James Earl Ray, was doing some like low-level campaign work under an alias for George Wallace, and he becomes like obsessed with Martin Luther King. Like, kind of stalks him all around the country, this and that.
Wallace does, or
no? James Earl Ray.
Okay.
So he's like, he did some work for George Wallace, who's a big-time racist, and it should be noted that James Earl Ray from rural Missouri also was like a noted racist. And so he decides that he's going to kill. Allegedly, this is what the story is, that he's going to kill Martin Luther King, and he believes that he will be seen as like a hero by so many people in the country that when George Wallace, the racist, gets elected president, he will receive a presidential pardon for killing Martin Luther King Jr.
Jeez.
So he starts plotting, and now he has access to these guns from doing this job as a gun runner. He gets a rifle, and when Martin Luther King goes up to Memphis, he's staying at this hotel. James Earl Ray stays at like a boarding house, like almost like a hostel, what it sounds like, across the street. So he's like watching him, and he has this rifle, and he's just like kind of waiting for his chance. And on April 4th, 1968, so less than a year after he breaks out of prison, he assassinates Martin Luther King. And now, because the police and everybody is always in the FBI and everyone else is constantly monitoring Martin Luther King, James Earl Ray leaves in a hurry. Okay, so he gets out of Memphis, he's on the run again, and he gets into Canada. Somehow, when he's in Canada, he's able to get a birth certificate and a passport. I don't know how the fuck that's possible, but he has a Canadian passport under a different name, which was Ramon George Sneyd, S-N-E-Y-D. So think about how hard it is to get a passport now. You have to have proper identification. You kind of have to have a birth certificate. If someone was like, hey, Ryan, go get yourself a new copy of your birth certificate, I would just be like, I don't know how to do that. I think they give you one when you're born. Like my mom has it somewhere.
Yeah, that's why they'll strike the fear of God in you. Like you can't lose your birth certificate.
Can't lose it. Yeah. Social security card, better have that laminated. These are hard things to, in my brain at least, to get. This guy who's a fugitive, just killed someone, can just go up to Canada and be like, oh, hey, I'm Canadian and I would like a passport and a new birth certificate. How the fuck is that possible? But he gets it. And then he flew from I think it was from Toronto to London. And what he was really trying to do was get to Rhodesia, which I think is modern day like Zimbabwe. And we've talked about Rhodes before. He's like the guy who had the Rhodes Scholar. He like did the diamond mines and the gold mines in South Africa. Again, he also giant racist. And so he was Rhodesia was this white minority ruled part of Africa. Like it's no longer a country, but he was like, I'm going to go there because like I'll be safe there, and then I'll wait for George Wallace to pardon me. So that was like his plan. But Martin Luther King Jr. is dead, and there's a worldwide manhunt for this guy. And somehow when he's in London, so he gets from Memphis to Canada, gets all his documentation in Canada, goes from Canada to London. They flag his passport. Now he's like kind of cohorting with different people trying to become like a mercenary, which is like a paid soldier assassin. So he's like kind of in this like underbelly of London, trying to get to Rhodesia, trying to do like all these different things. So his passport gets flagged, and they start to like question him. And like even his lawyer's like, hey, everybody knows you're James Earl Ray and not this guy Ramon George Sneyd. He's like, nope, I'm James. I'm Ramon. I'm Ramon. And he keeps saying it. He's like, all right, well. And the police are like, do you have anybody that we could contact about this? And he's like, yeah, why don't you contact my brother Jerry? Well, Jerry is Jerry Ray. It's like his brother in Missouri. It's like you just gave yourself up, you idiot. And so then they take him back, and he goes on trial, not really trial, I guess, because he pled guilty, but he goes before the court and he pleads guilty to and confessed to this crime. And he had left a bunch of his stuff, like I said, in Memphis because he had to leave in a hurry. But in 1977, he's in prison. And he recounted all of his confessions. He's like, I didn't really do that. He's like, I was aware that it was going to go down. That guy Raul was working for the government. I helped him get the rifle. He took the shot. But it's like, what does Raul look like? Where is Raul? What's his real name? Nobody knows, but James Earl Ray insists that it was not him who killed Martin Luther King, and he went to his deathbed. He died in prison from complications from hepatitis C, gross, in 1998, but that's what he said. He's like, hey, it was really people who were government agents who took this shot.
Wait, how did they link him to it in the first place, though? Because you know how they was like, oh, he fled right away. Like, how did they know? Like, all right, we got this, and this guy, it's got to be him.
Well, allegedly, he left the rifle. He left like a bunch of stuff in that area, like in the like on the street, basically from where he took the shot. So he took the shot from this room across the street from Martin Luther King's. It was at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis. So he takes the shot. And he runs out, and he's just like, well, I'm just going to ditch all this stuff. So he had like some personal items that like kind of put him at the scene, along with the rifle.
Okay.
And I don't know if fingerprinting was a thing or not. And then, so he gets all the, so it's like you have the fake documentation, and then you're in London, you're trying to get out of here, and there's like, there's records of you being in these other places. And
it looks like, a package was abandoned close to the site that included a rifle and a binocular.
Yep.
And both found with Ray's fingerprints. So there we go.
So they did have fingerprints. And then he did the thing with his brother where he's just like, talk to Jerry. And it's like, well, you have a different last name than your brother? We fucking got you.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the breakdown.
That's who James Earl Ray is, and that's how he got caught.
Okay. Crazy fucking life for that guy.
Yeah. Crazy life.
I mean, Mexican porn.
Yep.
Obviously. And like, there's this guy, and you're right, because, we've seen millions of pictures of fucking Lee Harvey Oswald, fucking paintings and shit of John Wilkes Booth. But this picture, James Earl Ray, I honestly could tell you, like, I haven't really seen this guy.
You haven't really seen this guy, and you got your computer open right now.
Yeah, and he looks like an evil fucking dude.
Yeah.
Like, he looks like a big-ass fucking scumbag racist.
Beady eye.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, do me a favor. Mm-hmm. Google this for me.
Okay.
Google Lee Harvey Oswald, Mexico, and see what images pull up.
Oh, no. Is this where you're going to wow me?
No, we haven't gotten there yet.
Okay. All right, I just pulled it up.
So there's a picture of Lee Harvey, allegedly, a guy who the government has always said was Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico, like going to the Soviet embassies and stuff. Mm-hmm. It doesn't look anything like Lee Harvey Oswald. The government always insisted that was him. To me, it looks more like James Earl Ray. Like he's got a fuller face. There's also allegations that James Earl Ray had facial reconstructive surgery. So I don't know. There's weird, like loose ties, like everything going around at the same time. I'm sure it's nothing, but it's something that popped up in my head.
Okay.
So no one's ever officially said that. This is just like, hey, chief, like get control of your own conspiracy brain here for a second.
Yeah.
But it's just weird that like both of those guys, both of those assassins had dealings with Cuba. Both those guys allegedly spent some time in Mexico. And both had like links to political movements, and they were dishonorably discharged from the military. Like there's a lot of like parallels between Oswald and James Earl Ray, which I found kind of odd. But so he dies in 1998. He's always claimed that he didn't do it. From 77 to 98, so 21 years on the record. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. And you know who believes him? Many members of Martin Luther King's family and like his inner circle. They believe him that he did not do it on his own or didn't do it at all.
Wow.
And they point the finger at the government, specifically the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover.
Holy shit. So here's where we kind of flip the switch.
Yeah.
Let's hop into part 2. But before we do, Chief, we got to talk about Roman. Most guys have tried different ways to last longer in bed. But thinking about baseball, saying the Pledge of Allegiance in your head, counting backwards from 10, doesn't always work. That's why the folks at Roman, an online men's health company, they're changing the game with Roman swipes.
Mm-hmm.
So they're clinically proven. That's the big word, clinically proven,
Yeah. Yeah. That's science.
Yeah.
Yeah.
clinically proven as a way to last longer in bed. They're effective, easy to use, and fast acting, but they don't require a prescription. Roman can ship swipes to you in discreet, unmarked packaging, and each swipe packet is small enough to hide in your wallet for whenever you need it. They're super easy to use. Just take the swipe out of the packet, swipe it on, let it dry. You're good to go. That's it. It should just be 1A with a condom. You know what I mean? It just should be right there.
A single pack?
Yes. You know, it just should be. You just should have it ready to go at all times because why would you not want to put on a better performance?
I like that. You know, we're talking about a lot of, sexual things in this episode, including orgies. I mean, if you show up to an orgy without a Roman swipe, if you show up to having sex anytime without a Roman swipe, you're doing yourself and your partner or partners a disservice. So get that Roman swipe.
What are you doing? Yeah, and to get your Roman swipe, go to GetRoman.com/dogwalk. You can get your first month of swipes for just $5 when you choose a monthly plan. That's GetRoman.com/dogwalk. Go check it out, folks. Enhance your sex game. All right, let's get into part 2 right now about the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. But like you just said, we went into everything we know about James Earl Ray and how his life and how it allegedly went down. Or how, he got tried and how, the American people think it went down. But now we get into his family thinking it wasn't them. It wasn't him.
That he was like incapable and that it wasn't just him. And after reading about it, it makes some sense. So J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI, like I said, the founder of the FBI, he hated Martin Luther King. So his big job back then was investigating, especially through the 50s, was investigating communists. And Martin Luther King had this great friend and a guy who really helped propel him onto the public stage, this Jewish guy named Stanley Levinson. And Stanley Levinson was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party in America. So it was so Martin Luther King has a lot of communist ties, or at least, I'm sorry, one really strong communist tie. And that was so he popped up on their radar, but it was they were taking, it was almost like when Obama was it was metadata, and they're just collecting all this metadata. They had a ton of information on everybody. Martin Luther King was not when they started being aware of him in Levinson, he wasn't the prominent figure. So then they had the bus protests, and then after his "I Give a Dream" speech, now he's the most famous, one of the most famous people in the world. And they started really stepping up their surveillance of him. The FBI did on Martin Luther King because they saw him as the, quote, most dangerous Negro in the United States. That was J. Edgar Hoover talking about Martin Luther King. So they saw him as a direct threat to the United States and the government bodies at work.
Now, what kind of threat though?
Well, I mean, if he
just to shake things up and make people uncomfortable, to make
Yeah, I think there was a way of life, and Hoover was kind of known as a guy who was also had racial and racist tendencies, and so he didn't like the fact that this guy, Martin Luther King, had effectively an army behind him, a non-violent but massive, a million-man march. This guy's got 1 million fucking people with him, right? That's a big deal. That's a voting block. That's something that could and did upset the order of how things had been in the United States, which you and I obviously now would say that was a very positive thing. I think most people think that was a very positive thing.
Yeah.
But if you've grown up in a segregated South, and you have these certain opinions, and you see all these people, and it's they're saying things, on the record as hey, this is a black revolution, and you're using language like that. They saw that as a threat to the United States and their power, and especially if there's a lot of communist ties and undertones to the message, because they're hey, we're impoverished, we're this, we don't have any rights. And that's something that communists typically say, those are things from Lenin, that was the playbook. There's a ruling class, and there's everybody else is a serf. So they're saying we don't have any rights, we don't have any money, we don't have any path forward, we're not even really in America. So Martin Luther King didn't really say that. He actually would say hey, it's amazing that Black America in the 60s has not gravitated to communism more. Like, they still believe in the idea of America. They just want to be able to participate in it, which that had been closed off to them by the way the system was. But Hoover just saw them as this big threat, and like I said, they started doing these wiretaps. And, this is a guy that, we've talked about Martin Luther King in the beginning as like the myth, right? Like, he's this unbelievable person. He's this great man. And he's Dr. Martin Luther King. Well, his doctor is in theology. So, meaning like he's this preacher, he's this Christian, like he's an untouchable, nonviolent, good guy. So Hoover was like, I don't really fucking believe that. I'm gonna get the goods on this guy. And he did. So they started spying on him. They would bug all of his hotel rooms. They would bug the houses of some of his like inner circle. They would say, hey, they would call the wife and pretend to be the phone company. Like, hey, like, we just talked to your husband. We're going to come by today and rewire some of your phones. We're having issues. So the wife just, okay, like, lets them in. And it's like, oh, these are all bugs and, and wiretaps of your phones. And they started collecting, and they'd be like, oh, hey, like, Martin Luther King's going to Atlanta. He's staying in this hotel. Make sure you put him in room, I'm making it up, 422. Well, why is it in 422? Because they've already bugged that room, and the FBI is staying in rooms 423 and 421, okay, on either side of him. So they're able to record all of his conversations. They're able to record him having orgies, him having, like, affairs with women in different cities and cheating on his wife and doing all these, like, shady things. And that he's not this moral authority for America. He's actually a sexual, like, deviant, is what Hoover was wanting to place him as. And they had the goods on him. They had these recordings, they had these documents, they had all this shit.
And that was back then. I'm sure it was so looked down upon. That, I mean, it's still not even
right.
People doing that shit now. People are gonna, fucking.
And it's one thing if you're Frank Sinatra, okay, and you're doing that. It's like, well, that's kind of expected. You're Martin Luther King. You're, a preacher, Christian, family man, moral authority of telling the United States and how these people how to live. Like, that undermines your own message and your own myth. And they're like, I'm not gonna listen to that guy. He's a fucking pervert. That's like what they're saying. That's what they're trying to get.
What they're going for.
They're trying to derail his entire movement by taking out, like, he's the head of it. And you can't listen to him because he's a fucking pervert. So the FBI, and like and this is under Lyndon Johnson's. I Have a Dream speech, I believe, was in 63 or 64. So Lyndon Johnson is president. Kennedy has been assassinated, and the FBI really, and Johnson gets pretty close with Martin Luther King for a while. And so when they sign the Civil Rights Act, Martin Luther King is in the White House, and the president signs it, like, does his signature for big bills like that, big laws rather, one pen stroke at a time, and he switches out the pen. So he signs his name with like 20 different pens, and everybody this is like still a tradition that goes on. And then people who were like prominent figures in getting the bill passed, whether you're Speaker of the House or you're Martin Luther King, like, you get one of the pens. It's like, hey, like, you're important to this. Here's your presidential signature pen. So Martin Luther King gets one of those, and he's very tight with Johnson. And Hoover still hates him, but Hoover now reports to Johnson. So he's still continuing this search for all these documents, all this data and all this recordings of Martin Luther King. And then Martin Luther King decides that he's going to speak out against the war in Vietnam. And that fucked him with Johnson. So that Johnson was an ally. Now he's an enemy, because Johnson, like, that was his thing. Like, he was the Vietnam guy. We're going to stop communism. So now it becomes, is he saying that he's against the Vietnam War because he's nonviolent, or is he actually a communist? Why don't we step up the surveillance on him even more? And actually, why don't we start leaking it to the press and to church leaders and to members, other theoretically rival members of his movement? So, like, they put out all this stuff. They leak it to people at the New York Times. They leak it to, like, some of these more racist, like, Southern papers that that they knew would probably print it. Church leaders. Nothing goes public. So Hoover is like pulling his fucking hair out. Like we've been spending hundreds, thousands of dollars and millions of dollars and hours trying to get this guy. We have him. We don't have anything that we can like charge him with criminally, so we can't arrest him, but we can ruin his reputation. And nobody will run with the story. So Hoover's like, what the fuck? Like this is like he's getting like actually mad. So what the FBI decides to do is write Martin Luther King a letter. And the letter has, like it says basically like, I know what you've done. And like calls him a pervert, says all these like very specific things that really only the FBI or Martin Luther King's innermost circle. So they're writing this letter pretending to be a disillusioned member of his cause. So like, you're like, he's a black guy writing to Martin Luther King. It's really just fucking J. Edgar Hoover. And says all these things, puts recordings of Martin Luther King having sex with this letter, sends it to his wife. Okay. Fuck. And in that letter, they basically say, it's implied that you should fucking kill yourself. So the FBI is writing Martin Luther King a letter saying you should kill yourself and you have 34 days to do so.
Jesus.
That's what I was going to tell you. So that the FBI was like, hey, we're writing this letter to Martin Luther King, fucking kill yourself. Crazy.
I mean, the FBI?
The FBI. And this is like a document that's out there. You can read the full letter.
That's fucked up.
It's super fucked up. And then they send the thing to his wife. So the wife is like, yeah, like they're trying to get you to kill yourself. And her official statement was that it was like some man with some woman. But there's no like video of it. So she doesn't believe that it's him necessarily, even though she was kind of like aware of some of his issues. And fuck, right? Like that's insane that the FBI would tell somebody to kill themselves.
I mean, listen, I get that. I mean, people play fucking dirty.
Yeah.
And clearly the FBI was playing dirty the whole time.
Yep.
So I get what they did. Send a letter, send it to his wife, like whatever. But then the fucking cherry on top to kill yourself is fucking insane.
Yeah. And that was really, because Johnson kind of cozied up to the FBI once Martin Luther King started speaking out against Vietnam. It was just kind of like, all right, like no holds barred. And that when he went anti-Vietnam at that time, that was a very controversial position. You're going against the president, you're going against the United States, you're going against you're on the side of the communists. Like this is not okay. And everybody turned on him. And not just Johnson, but like people who were writing for liberal papers like the New York Times were criticizing Martin Luther King for his stance on Vietnam, and they tried to be like, it's almost like Kaepernick got the stick to sports.
Yeah.
Well, Martin Luther King got stick to civil rights. Leave the wars to the generals. Like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, and they try to just like dismiss him as like, you're just a black guy who doesn't know anything. Like, shut the fuck up. And that was like, and who knows like how much of that was directed by the FBI through these different papers as well. And so the FBI again, like let's step up our surveillance on him even more, and they infiltrated his group. There's this photographer named Ernest Withers, which any photograph you see of Martin Luther King and the marches and the movements and behind the scenes stuff is really shot by this guy Ernest Withers. He's an FBI informant. Like they flipped him somehow, and so they got. They have this other report, this other document. They're trying to build this case to actually arrest him. This is going into March 1968. And they have an audio recording, allegedly, of a black woman in Baltimore being raped in a hotel room. And then they have like handwritten notes on top of the official thing. So like they go back after the fact and we're editing. And it's like, and Martin Luther King looked on and laughed. But it's like, how did he look on? How do you know it was, like he looked on and laughed? Because it's an audio recording. It's like, you didn't see shit. But it was like very clear, like no one disputes, like he had these like sexual, we'll say like experiences, misgivings, missteps. But there's no like hard evidence for something like that. But they were building this case against him. And the agents allegedly were right next door while that was going on and didn't intercede. So like if that was really going on and like they could just arrest him right then, like they're raping this girl, go arrest him.
Yeah, that's the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do,
Yeah.
but they didn't, but
They
then
were so caught up on fucking.
but they could have just done it. I don't know.
Yeah.
So like that section of that article, those documents doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But that was like March 12th allegedly is when that took place, and he was killed on April 4th. So it's like they're really stepping it up. And then same thing, like a lot of the reasons why his family doesn't believe that James Earl Ray did it and was able to, like, how do you get a passport? Maybe he had help getting that. How do you get out of Memphis? Maybe he had help from the government. And then, if the FBI was surveilling him as closely as they say they were, which there's plenty of documents saying that they just followed his every move. He checked into a hotel. We were there, watching. They just had guys on him all the time. They probably would have known that a guy with a rifle had been staying at the place across the street, you would think, and that they would have been able to intercede and stop the guy from shooting him, you would think. So there's a few different conspiracies. A lot of them are about James Earl Ray. And then there's just all these other people who they're like they've actually had enough evidence to reopen the case a few times, and then they just close it almost as soon as they open it, because there's just not necessarily enough there. But there is, however, going to be a ton of documents about Martin Luther King released in 2027. So we're 6 years away. But they still have, so they've declassified a ton of these documents from the FBI. The whole treasure trove is getting released officially in 2027. So the audio recordings, really everything is going to be made publicly available.
Wow. I mean, why is that? It's not fucking Avatar 3. There's like a limitation or something? I'm not saying what's the point. There's definitely a point to release them.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm always so curious about like the timelines. Like who set 2027?
Well, I think they probably set it a long time ago, and they're like, let's just make sure anybody who was involved in this is dead. Mm-hmm. Like that could be a thing. Like they do things with the Kennedy assassination like that too, where it's like they do these document dumps, and it's like, let's just make sure they're dead. So you can't anybody who would have been implicated or had this like trial, who they could have been like, well, yeah, I did that, but that's because I was told to do it by person X, and that went all the way up to the White, and like all these things that could really damage the government. They want all those people to just be dead.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So the Lorraine Motel, like, how did he exactly? Like, do you know the action of him doing it at the motel? I've seen pictures of the motel a million times. So
yeah. So there's the famous picture where Martin Luther King is laying shot on the ground on like this balcony outside his room at the Lorraine Motel, and he's got three of his people like pointing across the street at where supposedly the gunshot came from. But he was just it was like a hostel, like, and you can see pictures of the hostel. It's got like a small little bathroom, toilet, sink with a bed, and very meager accommodations, and he didn't care. Like, he knew that. So somehow, because they said that he was stalking him, which who knows if even that is true, and was stalking him, knew he was going to be there, and just had his gun, was like waiting for his opportunity. And he paid for a full week, but I think he was only there for a day before he took the shot. So he paid to stay the whole week at that place, at that hostel, cost him $8.25. So it was like, think about, like, I know like inflation, whatever, but that's like, must have been like the shittiest place in the world. But what does he care? He's there for one reason.
Yeah. Wasn't Ali against Vietnam too?
Yeah, I mean, that he started as Cassius Clay. He went the other way. He went to like the Malcolm X school of things, where he became a Muslim. And he was suspended from boxing while he was heavyweight champion of the world, because he was drafted and refused to go. He claimed he was a conscientious objector. So the boxing commissions across the United States refused to let him fight. And then he comes back on the stage, I think, and once the anti-war movement became like the will of the people, which I would say that happened in like 69, 70. I think we officially pulled out our last troops in 73. So that's when he was fighting like Joe Frazier. So Muhammad, but like he had to, I want to say he was suspended from boxing for like 3 years, because he was just like, I'm not going to Vietnam. And he said like similar things to what a lot of people in Martin Luther King's circle were saying, and his movement was saying, was like, nobody in Vietnam ever called me the N-word. No one in Vietnam ever, took away they've never done anything to me. I got a lot more problem with the people here. And Martin Luther King said, that was part of his thing. He goes, the government is more concerned about war in Vietnam than the war against poverty at home. And they say they have no money for schools and for our neighborhoods, but they got plenty of money for bombs. So it was like one of those were like the things that it was like, hey, like that's kind of true. Like what the fuck? So that was like, so that's when Johnson was like, this guy who has people, not just the African American community, but people all over he was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. He's got people all over the world hanging on his every word. And if this guy is speaking out against my big public policy thing, which is a war in Vietnam, that's fucking bad for me. Hey, Hoover, go get this guy. Take this guy down. And it just, they never were able to get him on anything criminal. They tried to disparage his name. And then James Earl Ray comes along, allegedly, and does their dirty work for them. And I'm not saying that he did it with their direction, but I wouldn't necessarily rule that out either.
So what do you think? Do you think there was, like, I know you said you won't rule it out, but
my gut says that at minimum, the FBI was not super concerned with interceding to stop James Earl Ray.
Yeah, like hypothetically speaking, if he's always being tailed by the FBI, in a sense, he almost has a security detail because he's being watched so often.
Exactly.
So there's definitely an element where this guy might have been the fall guy.
For sure. It's like the Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm just a patsy.
Yeah.
And that's effectively what James Earl Ray was saying. Yeah. Like I knew this guy Raul, he was a government agent. Like I knew him from running guns. I was running guns for the government, and Raul is the one who actually took the shot. No one knows who or what Raul is.
Damn, it's a shitty story.
Yeah.
Man.
Scary that the government will go that far to stop a peaceful guy with
King died at 39, dude. What a man.
Yeah. He won the Nobel Prize, I think, at like 34 or 35.
Did he?
Like that's that's how old I am.
Yeah, and I'm
sitting here, in sweats.
Yeah, and then James Earl Ray, he died in 98. That's not that long ago. I mean, at least in our lifetime.
Not at all.
So that's damn, dude.
Yep.
Wow. Well, all right, Chief. Thanks, man. That was informative.
Very informative. Yeah, stuff that I didn't know. And I feel
Did you watch anything else for people to check out?
Yeah, I did. There's a brand new documentary. It was actually not that dissimilar from the research I ended up doing, but MLK, it's like MLK/FBI. It's on Amazon Prime right now. It came out on January 15th.
You do have to rent it, though.
Yeah, it's like $5.99. But it's a very good documentary. And it kind of, tells a story of Hoover a little bit, who was a strange guy in his own right on many levels. And just that whole dynamic with because he was tight with Kennedy too, and Kennedy was like, hey man, like you're good, we're gonna work with you, but you should know about this guy Levinson. Like he's a communist. Like if you're serious about this cause, you got to ditch that guy. And he did. Martin Luther King kind of ditched that guy Levinson for a while because it's like I can't be your friend anymore because it's gonna hurt our overall cause if they link us to communism. So it's a wild times in the 60s.
Big time.
Yeah.
And it does make you think, like, what if that fucking hit piece comes out about him now? Like, how does that stop his mission and,
his legacy?
Age? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, can you separate the man from the message? And I think you almost always have to. Right, because you can be a great man and a shitty person and a shitty husband.
Yeah,
and I think
today a lot of people have fucking just jumped on his throat for it.
Yeah, everybody claims to have this moral authority over everybody else, which I'm very anti-cheating on your wife. Not an advocate of that. It doesn't disqualify the rest of his workings and teachings and mission.
Correct.
So,
all right, man. Thanks again. That's it for today, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll see you then.